1 year since the Nijjar killing in Canada and the Pannun assassination plot in the United States, how is India managing the diplomatic challenge to ties with US and Canada amidst continuing concerns over Khalistani separatism? Will the trials in the US and Canada strain them further? We're going to get you all the latest developments, especially after Prime Minister Modi met with the Canadian Prime Minister, the US President, and the US NSA. Hello and welcome to Worldview at The Hindu with me, Suhasini Haidar. Now, you could call it the tale of two impending trials with the extradition of an Indian, Nikhil Gupta, to the United States and the arrest of 4 Indians in Canada. India is now expected to face a number of questions over its operations on targeting Khalistani separatists in the West as the two trials get underway. Now, this week marked many anniversaries. It's a year since Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani separatist wanted on terror charges in India, was gunned down outside a gurudwara in Canada's Surrey. It's also a year since the US FBI and other agencies stopped what they called an assassination plot underway against Gurpatwant Singh Pannun in New York. He's another Khalistani separatist wanted on terror charges in India. And it's a year since Prime Minister Narendra Modi's big state visit to the United States. Obviously, we've been speaking about these on Worldview, but this week then saw a flurry of new activity linked to the 3 events. The first, Prime Minister Modi met with US President Biden. It was a brief exchange on the sidelines of the G7 in Italy, but it was the first time they met since the FBI had filed those charges in the Pannun case, accusing Indian security officials for the assassination plot. Second, Prime Minister Modi also met with Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau. That was a much frostier exchange. The first time those two men had met since Trudeau went public in Parliament with accusations against Indian security officials in the Nijjar killing. In fact, that's the tweet that the Prime Minister put out, but here's what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said after that meeting.
Tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. You mentioned what you did in Parliament last September. You spoke with Prime Minister Modi at the G7 over this weekend. Has there been an improvement in that relationship? Is Modi and his government cooperating now? And how is this encounter different than your last?
But now that he's through his election, I think there is an opportunity for us to engage, including on some very serious issues around national security and keeping Canadians safe, and the rule of law that we will be engaging in.
Have you seen improvement in cooperation? I know investigators were concerned, and I know you don't direct the police on this, but have you gotten any sense of whether things have improved in the past little while?
There is work ongoing very much.
Next came an announcement that Nikhil Gupta, the man wanted in the Pannun plot case, had been extradited to the United States from the Czech Republic and had been produced in a New York court. That indicates a trial is likely to begin in that case. Then we saw 4 senior US congressmen, including Democrat Bernie Sanders, Senator Chris Van Hollen, writing to US Secretary of State Blinken saying they're very concerned about the allegations. They call them credible. They want a full briefing by the State Department on what's been happening with India and a follow-up on the action being taken against India. Fifth, after cancelling twice this year, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan finally landed in India for his first such meetings since the US agencies went public with their charges against India. Sullivan met with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, the External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar, and even got an audience with Prime Minister Modi. Now, no public statements were made on this Pannun issue at all, which itself tells a story, but the two sides met ostensibly to discuss the ISET review and technological cooperation. Back in Canada, the entire parliament there decided to mark a year since Nijjar's killing by holding a moment of silence for him. That is certainly unusual given the charges against him in India, while we saw Nijjar supporters carry out rallies across Canada. So India sort of countered by talking about its commitment to terrorism, announcing a memorial this weekend for those who had died. 329 of them who died on board the Air India Kanishka flight in 1985, which was an act of Khalistani terrorism. Meanwhile, there, Australia's public broadcaster released a documentary that not only revealed what is called the Nest of Spies case, where 4 Indian diplomats were expelled for spying in 2020. It linked their activities to surveillance of Khalistani separatists in Australia, also linked to the Nijjar case in Canada, and then spoke about political interference in Australia by groups connected to the ruling BJP.
Because the documentary has several elements to it. It contains blatant untruths. Please, I would urge you to please have a look at the documentary. It's biased and reflects unprofessional reporting. It appears to serve a particular agenda to malign India. We obviously oppose any such attempts to condone, justify, or even glorify terrorism. Kanishka bombing, we have told you that the question of political space being given by Canada to extremists, to people who advocate violence, people who advocate anti-India agenda is the real problem, and therefore we have time and again been insisting that the Canadian authorities take strict action against them.
What is then the diplomatic impact we've seen over the last year and then particularly this last week? The first diplomatic impact is that the charges have definitely taken a wrecking ball to the India-Canada relationship. It is unlikely that these can recover anytime soon. And remember, we've spoken about the importance of the India-Canada relationship, whether it comes to trade, people-to-people ties, as well as investment. They've certainly, all the impact has had on the India-US relationship as well. Even if the governments still have deep cooperation, there's impact on intelligence cooperation, on legal cooperation, increasingly concerned voices, as you saw, from the US Congress. These will all have an impact on ties. In fact, I wrote more in an editorial at The Hindu talking about the ties from warp speed to the need for a reset now, and I certainly hope you can read that. Third, the accusation by US congressmen of what is called transnational repression is much more serious in the long run, as it does two or three things. One, it categorizes India along with US enemies like Russia, China, and Iran, who are accused of transnational repression. Two, it impacts India's image as a democracy, which is very important in the world. Three, it could open India to punitive action, including the withholding of defense hardware and technologies under the Arms Export Control Act. So what does all of this mean? What are the challenges ahead for Indian diplomacy, and what does the government really need to do on a war footing? One, the government needs to prepare for the trial's revelations. So if there are revelations coming out in the trials, either in the US and Canada, that the Indian public need to know about, the government needs to get ahead of them in a sense, both publicly and in terms of its internal processes. Second, it must conclude India's high-level inquiry into the US's investigations. That's already been announced. It also can reconsider broadening that inquiry to include the Canadian allegations. Third, it must cooperate or be seen to be cooperating in a Canadian investigation if Canadian officials provide proof. So far, the External Affairs Minister has said nothing has been provided that could help India do any investigations here. The fourth is a more important long-term one, and that's about credibility. That India must prove that the charges against Khalistani separatists who are on India's terror list show that they are actually wanted for violence, for violent acts. They aren't just dissidents against the Indian state. And then pursue those extradition requests, backing them up with that evidence. This, as I said, is about India's credibility, and it pertains to India's requests with other countries on all kinds of issues around the world. So what's worldview's take? Regardless of what is proven in court in North America, it is clear that India has been put in the dock because of this perception that its intelligence agencies have overreached in their international operations, particularly when it comes to friendly countries and to strategic partners. The charges of violating international rules and transnational repression are not to be taken lightly. These don't just have a bearing on India's image. They can severely curtail the work of India's diplomats, missions worldwide, and damage bilateral ties irreparably. All right, I have some reading recommendations. Some of them I've spoken about before. This is a shadowy subject, so it's always a little more difficult to find reading material in terms of books. There are, of course, a lot of stories, a lot of reports that you can find on the web and on www.thehindu.com. The first book is RAW, A History of India's Covert Operations by Yatish Yadav. I've spoken about this before, a number of different operations. The second is called Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistani Project. This is by Canadian journalist Terry Milewski. There's another book, a newer one, called Sikh Separatism, A History of Conflicts by Rajesh Singh. It's a fairly deep work, but it's easy to read. I certainly recommend that you take a look at it because it talks a lot about the history. Then two academic books. One is called Transnational Repression in the Age of Globalization, what it means when there's all this migration, by Dana Moss and Sepira Furstenberg. And there's one coming out soon. I haven't been able to read much about it. It's called Transnational Repression and Extrajudicial Killings by Marty Gitlin. So watch out for that. Finally, there are two books by a former RNAW chief of India's Vikram Sood. One is called The Unending Game, a former RNAW chief's insights into espionage. The other is called The Ultimate Goal. It talks about how countries build global narratives. So I hope you enjoy reading those and do join us again here on Worldview. But from the team for now, thanks for watching.